General, I propose we go forward with your monsters versus aliens idea thingy.
So, you think you can dance?
Monsters vs. Aliens. I know I've talked a lot about DreamWorks' biggest franchises, but this time, I'm gonna be looking into one of their more interesting movies. A film that came out during their golden era in the 2000 decade, but didn't match up to the leagues of Shrek or Madagascar in terms of popularity. Sure, it was a hit in its own right, but it never got big to the point of having its own sequel. At the most, it only spawned a couple of shorts, a TV special, and a short-lived Nickelodeon series.
Monsters vs. Aliens! Monsters vs. Aliens! Monsters vs. Aliens!
However, that doesn't mean that the movie was left forgotten. Much like many of the other DreamWorks films of that time, it went on to have a bit of a cult following now that it has a nostalgia factor for Gen Z and millennials. Not to mention how the franchise occasionally finds itself to be a source of memes that could be as wild as the monsters themselves, especially when Bob is involved. It's like the internet thinks that he's a bottomless pit of viral possibilities that must be fed.
Don't cry, little monster. Uncle Monger's got enough cereal to feed you your entire life. Jerry, sir, bring over the feed hose ASAP. The boy's hungry.
Before we do meet the monsters, however, I must confess that this is actually my first time watching this movie. Sure, I was aware of it back when it was first released, and I could recognize some of the characters by what they look like, but I guess this one always flew over my radar and was never a priority to experience it for myself. But hey, if this will be my first reaction, then all the better to make this a fascinating review. So now that we're checking out the biggest battle that DreamWorks crafted, in terms of the fighter's size, is the movie itself a monster-sized gem that was taken for granted? Or is this a little too alien compared to the studio's other movies? Let's find out. The story. The best way to describe Monsters vs. Aliens is that this is the DreamWorks version of a B-movie.
You like jazz?
Let me rephrase that. The film is DreamWorks' homage to those sci-fi horror B-movies of the 1950s and 60s where monsters go on a rampage. Features such as Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, The Blob, The Fly, Mothra, and whatever flicks where prehistoric beings are revived and wreak havoc. However, in this case, the monsters are here to save the city instead of destroying it, as the story centers around Susan, who was hit by a meteorite filled with quantonium on her wedding day. As a result, she turns into a giant, and the people around her are either terrified by her massive growth, or secretly excited because you know there's at least one person who's happy to see their king come to life. The government then stepped in to seize Susan and move her to a secret facility with other quirky monsters. But it wasn't until an alien invasion occurred with Galaxar sending a giant robot to claim the Earth as his own, when the monsters are sent out to stop the aliens' plans and save the world so that they could be free.
You want us to fight an alien robot?
And in exchange, the President of these United States has authorized me to grant you your freedom.
What I find to be very clear upon watching this movie is that the driving force of Monsters vs. Aliens is its own concept. To experience the big battle between retro monsters fighting against aliens with the entire planet at stake. And I'll say now that when those scenes happen, they are the best parts of the picture that make the most out of what audiences want to experience. However, there is still a whole movie that has to happen around that, and this is where it falls flat. A drawback from prioritizing the novelty of its concept is that the story feels sidelined and wasn't handled with care. In a way, there are two plots that it's trying to tell. One is more narrative-based about Susan trying to adapt to her new life as a monster, and the other is more action-driven about stopping the aliens.
Ha! That should stop your puny... Computer, close door hanger 2! Close door hanger 3!
It sounds easy to blend the two together to create a strong story in theory. In a way, it could have been its own Suicide Squad before Suicide Squad became movies. Yet this film had a hard time to make the connection. It always has to put one plot to a halt so that they can move the other forward, and then vice versa, resulting in a movie with not one full story, but two narratives that have to be squished together without mixing. And because of that, they both come out as weak and rushed, where it doesn't give me time to either connect with Susan and her struggle with living as a giant, or understand Galaxar's full power and how much of a threat he can be to the monsters and the world. As a movie that tries to simultaneously carry two narratives, I end up getting very little substance with just the bare bones of what can resemble a story.
Who are we kidding? We could save every city on the planet and they'd still treat us the same way they've always treated us. Like monsters.
But I understand if some could argue that, since this pays tribute to those old B movies, the story should arguably never be the priority in the first place. When you look back at those, some could say that they never had great plots either, since their purpose is to be popcorn flicks to see the monsters terrorize people. I get it, but here's the difference between those and Monsters vs. Aliens. The B movies are cheap, cheesy, tacky, over the top, and obviously fake. Now, I'm not saying that to slam them, quite the opposite actually. Those are the traits that put themselves as standout moments in cinema history. It's their unique, low-budgeted craftsmanship that gives them their own charm and make them feel timelessly enjoyable in a non-serious way. Monsters vs. Aliens, on the other hand, is anything but a low-budgeted B movie. It's a mainstream animated feature by a major studio with an all-star cast and a budget reportedly as big as Susan with $175 million. As much as it may try to act like those B movies, it's still first and foremost a DreamWorks feature, and as a product of Hollywood, it cannot get away with the same flaws, and they end up hindering the picture instead of sharing that retro charisma.
Hey, I'm not depressed. I'm tired.
Why are you tired? You didn't do anything.
Well, I haven't been sleeping well, all right?
And if there's one thing that makes it obvious that this is a DreamWorks film, it's the humor. Unfortunately, that is what makes it distinctively DreamWorks in all the wrong ways. It tries to be a Shrek-style comedy by also poking fun of the tropes you'd find in those old movies, on top of providing additional gags that are distinct to the actor delivering them, and loads of pop culture references. Honestly, I cringed more than I laughed during my experience, and the jokes feel more like they're just copying what made Shrek and Madagascar funny in the hopes to be like them, instead of being funny in their own right.
It's amazing out here.
It's a little hotter than I remember. Has the Earth gotten warmer? That'd be great to know that. That'd be a very convenient truth.
I get the direction it wanted to go with being a tribute to those classic low-budgeted flicks, and there are a few parts where the idea can shine. Its biggest problem, however, is turning that concept into its own movie. And despite that it had so much more resources than those old films, it failed to capture what made them fun to watch. It's one thing for a B movie to not have a great story, but I expected better from DreamWorks. The animation. The best way to describe Monsters vs. Aliens animation is that it's very much, of its time. I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, it's just that there are some things about it that is very noticeable that this is from 2009. You see, during the late 2000s and early 2010s, animated features were going through a transitional period where they became familiar with computer animation after several years of learning how to use it. So now they want to be more experimental and try out new styles. The only problem is that the technology they had was still best suited to obtain realism, which often resulted in an awkward clash where the look wants to be stylistic, but also be realistic at the same time. In the case of this movie, have you ever looked at those street caricatures with the way they can exaggerate your features and thought to yourself, gee, I wonder what happens if you turn those drawings into real people? Well, Monsters vs. Aliens is here to answer that question. Thumbs! And it's honestly horrifying. In fact, this is what I mean by the look's awkward middle. It's not stylistic enough to escape the sense that it wants to emulate the look of the real world, and it's not realistic enough with how the proportions, especially on the faces, are grossly mutated. It just makes the people look weird and unsure of the direction that it wants to stick to. However, I'll say that the designs themselves aren't ungodly terrible. Maybe there is a way to make them work in the picture, if it weren't for it obsessing over the details. What I mean is that I feel like one of the visual's biggest priorities is the textures, and that's where they put in a lot of its efforts onto the realism. On their own, they work very well and are able to get the specifics down to get the feel of what they are, whether it be with skin, hair, the iris in their eyes, fur, or Bob's goo. However, when used onto these characters, it can feel a little too much with how much they put in, and that's what adds to the uncomfortable nature of the designs, especially when it tries to do close-ups to make us stare at the details.
We need a Hail Mary pass. We need raw power. We need monsters.
Yes, animators, those are some very nice textures. Now please have some distance between the camera and the people. But what is funny is that, at the same time, I do recognize some elements where it's generally strong. The non-human characters, like the Monsters and Galaxar, have nice designs that play with the type of creatures that they are, and the character animation is great where they help express the personalities in a more dynamic way, and can get creative with some of the more unique traits with the monsters.
Please, madam, stop doing that! Ow!
Whatever mad scientist made you, he really went all out.
It's weird because there are some things that do work and could partly make the animation feel strong. It's just those strange designs and overwhelming use of textures that kind of throws off the look. Oh, and while we're on that note, you know that this is a 2009 film when it loves doing those cheap 3D tricks.
Did you say cheap 3D tricks?
Chlorine in my eyes!
You see, as the first DreamWorks movie made in the stereoscopic 3D format, the film frequently would make efforts to have things go in your face that was meant to look cool when watching it in 3D. Since this was released during that short period in modern cinema when they really tried to make that a thing. And almost every major movie at the time, especially the animated ones, tried to make that a big selling point.
Get ready, put on your 3D glasses, and experience an in true 3D event powered by Intel. DreamWorks Monsters vs. Aliens. Rated PG in true 3D.
Excuse me?
March 27th.
Now, I get it that this could also be part of the throwback to those retro movies, because 3D was also prominent during that time, but I don't know about you, I'm happy that it's mostly a thing of the past. And watching all the 3D stunts here in 2D just reminds me of how this was part of a bygone era.
Derek.
But there is one thing I've quickly mentioned here, yet I haven't explained myself about it, and that's with the action scenes. Like I said, Monsters vs. Aliens is at its best when it presents the battle of the monsters versus the aliens. That's when the movie makes the most out of its concepts by getting full creative with the scale, cinematography, the abilities of the characters, and sometimes using the environment with San Francisco or Galaxar's ship. My one criticism with those scenes is that they can be far and few between, but when they do happen, those are the times when I find myself to be the most engaged with this picture. I'll say that I wouldn't categorize this amongst DreamWorks' best animation, especially when the combination of the designs and the textures can feel off-putting, but to give it credit, there are more elements of it that are good than not. And when it works, it justifies why this concept fits for an animated feature. The animation can look monstrous, but at least it's got some power to keep it mostly solid. The characters. Since I've been talking quite a bit about Monsters vs. Aliens, I think it's time that I get to discuss about the monsters and aliens themselves. And as creative as they can be visually presented, I cannot say the same about the characters. This is one of those films where, since it used a cast of big-name celebrities, it makes itself dependent on the actors to craft their personalities, while the script doesn't do much to help them. This is not to say that there wasn't effort put into it. The voices were able to give it what they got to bring their characters to life. I'll even say that there are some standout performances like Reese Witherspoon as Susan, Hugh Laurie as Dr. Cockroach, and Stephen Colbert as the President, who made the most out of the materials given to them.
Fighting an alien robot? That was me, not him. And that was amazing!
Now, you're going to feel a slight pinch in the brain. Sorry.
Eat lead, alien robot!
Evidently they eat lead.
Get him on the chopper.
I'm brave!
But for the most part, there isn't much to the cast other than their respective voices. First on the list is Susan, the woman who was ready to have a new life with her soon-to-be husband until the Quantonium made her ginormous, thus changing everything, and now has to live as a monster.
Oh, please, God, please tell me this isn't real. Please tell me I just had a nervous breakdown at the wedding and now I'm in a mental hospital and I'm on medication. It's giving me hallucinations.
I'll give it that she started out well with how it established her goal of wanting to turn back to normal. However, with how the story is handled, she doesn't have a chance to explore deeper into that desire and could only have a few quick moments to have that arc with her identity. In a way, Susan is like a weaker version of Tiana from The Princess and the Frog. The film would rather spend more time knowing her as a giant than as a character.
Why did I have to get hit by a meteor to see that? Oh, stupid idiot!
As for her monstrous allies, there's Dr. Cockroach, the mad scientist who is literally part cockroach.
Hexadecimal color code system. This won't be but a moment.
Missing Link, who's mostly Will Arnett boasting his ego, but this time he's past his prime and has to come in terms that he's not the lady catcher he wishes to be.
I know what you're thinking. First day in prison, you want to take down the toughest guy in the yard. Well, I'd like to see you try.
Bob, who is just the dumb version of Seth Rogen.
What happened to the there isn't a jar in the world I can't open stuff? Wait, did you find a jar you couldn't open? What was in it? Was there pickles in it? Where's the giant jar of pickles?
And Insectosaurus, who is more the animal of the group that literally is just a bug, but is also the biggest who even towers over Susan.
It's okay, buddy. Don't worry about it. Who's a handsome bug, huh? You like it when I rub your tummy?
And then there is the villainous alien, Galaxar. You know how in Shrek, people have theorized that Farquaad is a parody of Michael Eisner to the point of even looking like him? Did they just do the same thing with Jeffrey Katzenberg?
That lower life form thinks she can steal my Quantonium?
Anyways, as cool as he may look, there's not much to Galaxar other than being the flat evil alien who wants to take over the world. That's it. Even when there would be moments that seem like there could be more to him, they're just passed off as lame jokes. He doesn't even try to be anything more than just be the film's conflict.
But I've told you too much already.
But the funny thing about Galaxar is that, while he may be the antagonist, he's not the meanest or the harshest character of the film. I'd give that title to the rest of the humans. They don't just look ugly on the outside, the same applies on the inside as well. Rather it be Susan's family, her fiancé Derek, General W.R. Monger, get it? Or the not-so-smart president, their personalities are vile, being either completely selfish, heartless, or just full-on dumb with comedy as stupid as them. And that's just another major part of what makes my experience feel unpleasant. There's so much of this movie that's mean-spirited. For the most part, I felt sorry for Susan because of how she's always surrounded by toxic people, both before and after her massive growth. It's one thing to put out a message of humans are the biggest monsters, but it feels like a cop-out to make the actual monsters more likable by not doing a whole lot with them and make everyone else as despicable as possible. It's like the more we hang out with them, the more I feel like Galaxar might have a point.
How long will I be here?
Indefinitely.
Can I contact my parents?
No.
Derek?
Negative.
Do they know where I am?
No, and they never will.
At best, the movie can deliver some good voice acting who can add a bit of charm. But the actors alone are not enough to create memorable personalities for this picture. They're either dependent on their own gimmick, or they hinder the film by contributing to its mean-spirited tone. Maybe they could do the job to take down the alien, but these characters don't have what it takes to save this movie. As huge as some of these monsters may be, they missed the mark on this one. Monsters vs. Aliens attempted to be a tribute to those classic sci-fi horror movies, but it feels more like a mainstream mess than have any of that campy charm. At best, there are some moments where it could be a decent popcorn flick with creative action, good animation, and some solid voice acting, but most of it fails to make the entire picture enjoyable. The writing and even the directing feels poorly handled, with the story being bland and rushed, has an uncomfortably mean-spirited tone, the comedy is awful, and the characters range from being forgettable to completely revolting, along with some awkward designs and annoying efforts to capitalize on the 3D craze that end up making it feel dated in the long run. It's a movie that has such high regards of its own concept that it believes that alone is enough to make this film than to actually make the film itself. Personally, I find it hard to recommend this feature. I think you're better off watching those old movies that this feature is based on, or a better animated alternative that came out during the same year is The Princess and the Frog. Sure, it's not as action-packed, but I think Tiana's journey with her transformation is way better handled than Susan's. And if you want another good recommendation if you enjoyed this review, then give it a like and come subscribe to my channel. You can also go even bigger with that support by joining my Patreon so that you can help me find more monstrous animated movies, both in the good and the bad way. I might run the risk of upsetting those with nostalgia over this film, but I didn't have a good time with this one. And while it was close to not getting it, I decided that I'll give this the Animat seal of garbage. This whole movie turned out to be as dumb as Bob himself. Hey guys, this is Animat, and I want to start things off by giving out a huge thanks to Movie Madness, whose amazing support on Patreon allowed them to get some amazing rewards, including this one, where they got to ask me to review Monsters vs. Aliens. And I don't know about you, but I feel like there might be this massive risk that I might have said an unpopular take about this movie. No, but for real though, I do understand if people have some nostalgic memories in regards to Monsters vs. Aliens, considering that at this point it is at the age where it is old enough where people would remember growing up with Monsters vs. Aliens during the peak of its popularity. But when it comes to me, I guess I never really got into it, or I guess I never got to actually watch or experience the feature during that time when it was out in theaters and when it was still fresh. But now that I did see it for myself, it's just, I would say at best, it's a movie that's just not for me. I mean, yeah, sure. There are some moments where I could see that it did get enjoyable, like whenever it becomes a popcorn flick and the action does happen where we see the battle of the monsters versus the aliens. But when it comes to the rest or whatever's around that, which is most of the movie, it honestly felt unpleasant and very mean-spirited, like I said in my review. It's like if Susan just constantly surrounds herself by just very toxic people, and the only ones that are just not as toxic as them are the actual monsters, and that's it. So from there, it just didn't feel like a fun time for me while I was watching it. And if I would have to go and find more positive things to say about Monsters vs. Aliens, they would be very minor things. Like maybe there would be like a few jokes here and there that might be a bit funny, or I would say that, you know, the memes that do come out of it from time to time, they could be enjoyable. Or I do find Susan to be attractive, I'm not gonna lie. Even if she is a giant, then I would still smash that. Or in this case, I would let her smash me. But regardless, the point that I'm making is that if there are anything more positive things that I could say about this movie, they would be extremely minor, where they wouldn't necessarily impact the way that I would view the movie as a whole. So yeah, this is pretty much to say that, am I in the minority? Is this a hot take to say that Monsters vs. Aliens is not good? Not to mention that I did give it the Animat seal of garbage. Maybe, but yeah, I don't know. It's just, this movie is just not for me. But anyways, now that we are done with Monsters vs. Aliens, it is now time that we shall go and move on to the animation hat. Oh, and before I go on to the next review, I would just like to go and say, if you are like Movie Madness, or if you want to be like Movie Madness and you want to go and support my work and get some amazing rewards, which honestly, there's a lot of them, but one great one does include checking out my videos before anyone else, unedited, by the way. They are like kind of a director's cut or an animat cut, you could say. If you go and check them out on Patreon, then if you want to get those awesome rewards, then all you have to do is go to patreon.com/animat. But at the same time though, if you would like to suggest an animated film you would like me to review and that I would put onto the animation hat, then all you have to do is write me an email at animatsreviews@gmail.com. All right, so now let's see what our next movie is going to be. Okay, oh, well, that turned out to be much faster than I thought. And so the next review shall be... Whoop. Oh, what the... Oh, okay. Okay, you know what? I think I'm down to try this out. I'm going to be down to try it, especially when it comes to this show. Now, keep in mind, yes, I am going to be reviewing a movie, but it is based on a show. As of this video, it did see a bit of a rebound in popularity, especially with the, the new additional season or the revival or whatever may call you. But at this point, now that it is making a comeback, I guess now it is my turn to see them again, or at least see them more in full now. But this time, we're going to be going into the second dimension. And I don't necessarily mean that we're just going to be watching a 2D movie here.
Time to wave the white flag and head for the bunker, boys. Let's check on the situation in 500 years. Who wants to freeze my head?